We welcome, on behalf of Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, the Executive Committee of the Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, and the people of Chandigarh, we welcome you all. I'll begin from this side. Dr. Rubina Karode, Mr. Atul Dodiya, Dr. Tasneem Mehta, Anju Dodiya, Bhavna Kakkar, Sadanand, Menon, Alka Pande. I'm calling her Alka Pande knowingly because she is a friend. I can take this liberty with her. I'm not calling her Dr. Alka Pande. Atul, as we all know, has been here, and he was kind enough to spare 5 days out of his life. He's always globe-trotting, doing things for the workshop which he did. And College of Art students, in fact, they were all the time, around him. He was taking classes under the tree, on the road, in the grass, in the, gallery, painting, talking, discussing, telling stories. He's a good storyteller. Thank you so much, Atul, for sparing your time for the second time. And I'm sure you'll do another workshop with us soon. Dr. Tasneem Mehta, she is the director of the Daubhaji Art Museum in Mumbai, and which was earlier called Victoria and Albert Museum. And she's completely changed. And she's changed the way museums are managed, museums are presented, and how museums can be made, more interactive in a way. There's a more kind of interaction with the public. So be prepared. It's going to be a bit serious, longish kind of a session, but I'm sure we'll all benefit from it.
Now, when I was given this onerous task of being a moderator of a very intense kind of trajectory which has been carrying on for a number of years on self and the other, being an extra keen type and having been in academics for a long time, I did my huge preparation. But we are also all inventive and innovative people, and I've been told that from 45 minutes I have to bring it down to 20, so I shall leave some and quote some and do it as quickly as I can. But there are certain things that I just cannot leave out. I do want to begin with a little quote from one of my favorite textbooks. Is that of Paul Ricoeur, who wrote in 1962 that the discovery of the plurality of cultures is never a harmless experience. When we discover that there are several cultures instead of just one, and consequently at a time when we acknowledge the end of a sort of cultural monopoly, be it illusory or real, we are threatened with the destruction of our own discovery. Suddenly it becomes possible that there are just others, that we ourselves are an other among others. All meaning and every goal having disappeared, it becomes possible to wander through civilizations as if through vestiges and ruins. The whole of mankind becomes an imaginary museum. Where shall we go this weekend? Visit the Angkor ruins or take a stroll in the Tivoli of Copenhagen? We can very easily imagine a time closer at hand when any fairly well-to-do person will be able to leave his country indefinitely in order to taste his own national death in an interminable, aimless voyage. In a very interesting text, Craig Owens, when he talks of the discourse of others, feminists and postmodernity, talks of a postmodern knowledge, or le savoir postmodern. He says it's not simply an instrument of power. It refines our sensitivities to differences and increases our tolerance of incommensurability. This is what Lyotard wrote in his Condition of Postmodern. When we are looking at very important issues like self and the other, there are things which have to be, the underpinnings of theory. I just want to give a little bit. I'm going to not go through all the notes, but just mention some of the things which were of important, providing me the cultural context to go on with the self. And again, I'll go back a little bit to, it was very interesting that Anju gave her visual presentation, which was a lot about the self. So you saw a lot of what interiority means, the whole thing of the discourse of the interior, and then I will also give some little readings which are very important for me when I look at the self and the other. But I want to begin with the post-structuralists and what Deleuze said of becoming the other, and the philosophy of the self, which defines the essential qualities that makes one person distinct from all others. There have been, of course, numerous approaches to defining these qualities, and the self is different with different people, and this whole thing of the conscious and the unconscious. I would think of the fractured self of Plato, Simone de Beauvoir's Memoirs of a Beautiful Daughter, when in the first volume of her autobiography of Memoirs de Jeune Fille Rongée, when she traces her own childhood, her relationship with her parents, her profound friendship with Zaza, and her schooling through her years at the Sorbonne. In this volume, Beauvoir shows the development of her intellectual and independent personality and the influences which led her decisions of becoming a philosopher and a writer. Michel de Montaigne's essays, Rousseau's Émile, particularly I'm very fond of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, Remembrances of Things Past, when he talks of the role of memory, which is very central to the novel, introduced with the famous Madeleine episode in the first section. Then, of course, feminist theorists like Hélène Cixous in The Laugh of Medusa. Anju had yesterday mentioned the poetry of Sylvia Plath, where she, talks of what became of her typical imagery using personal and nature-based depictions. The admired poets of hers like Dylan Thomas, Yeats, and Marianne Moore. Then we come to, of course, otherness, where, again, we look at the famous parable of Hegel's master-slave dialectic. I also wanted to look at the Hegelian thought of the introduction of the constituent of the self-consciousness. Here again I wanted to bring in the second sex, looking at the works of Julia Kristeva, who argues between anthropology and psychology, Lucy Irigaray, and this whole thing of the Lacanian gaze. Very, very important, of course, is Jacques Lacan, who kind of, in his algebraic symbology of his concept of the big other, or the French autre, is very, very important. And naturally, Homi Bhabha, and then in all his works, when he's looking particularly in his iconic book, The Location of Culture, Said and the Idea of the Orient, which was of the 60s, and Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. Now, I did make copious notes on why I was introducing all of them, but I think now, with probably lunchtime and hunger and loss of concentration of the stomach and the head, I'll go into the domain of the other, the Lacanian kind of gaze, and just kind of concentrate with my two panelists. My role was that of a moderator, so I think I've kind of laid out the landscape of the self and the other, the writings of theorists, psychoanalysts, and poets who have used the genre of the autobiographical, the location of culture, the looking of pluralities. All these things are very important aspects of when we are trying to interrogate and question these two important notions of self and other. Maybe I would like to begin with Atul, because his works really in some ways bring together the self-conscious, the unconscious, the appropriations, of the center, of the periphery, of the self and of the other in all the works. Just in fact, last year's works itself have all aspects of this. So would you like to just draw a little bit on that? I know the good thing is that you did explain them in great detail, but keeping the self and the other, if you could just perhaps talk about that a little bit and why you feel that they locate these two.
Yeah, I think the basic the thing is that I'm interested in what other people are doing and what already has been done in the past. And there is so much joy to, when one is looking at painting, sculpture or any other form of art. In my case, I realized that I get so obsessed and they become part of my visual vocabulary. They become, they're there always with me, and as if and because being yourself a painter, myself a painter, and I try to attempt something, as soon as I try to do something, I'm reminded of something. Like, of course, there was a time when I even felt, when I first time went outside India, abroad, it was Paris in 1991, 92. I was already 30 then. So, and before that, whatever I had seen was all through reproductions. And when I actually saw the works of art in a museum, then I realized some of the, say, courbets and the Orsay, which are huge, the size, scale, all this. Anyway, I mean, the thing is that basically that, I felt I call myself a figurative painter, and within the figurative genre, such a profound work has happened. I think I would probably stop painting. And I literally actually kind of, I became too slow. It took me almost 3 years to come to terms with myself to restart again and do something when I returned in 92. So I think it's the art which I like very much, they remain with me. That's one thing. Second thing, I feel that, the other, in Gujarati we have a word avar. Avar is also mean other, dusra, kind of thing. That gradually I noticed, not consciously, that got eliminated from my awareness, my consciousness. I feel everything, everything is mine. Everything and I belong, everything belongs to me, I belong to everything. And someone painted this beautiful picture, not just for himself, for all of us, and for me, probably. And it comes to me in a strong way when I do my painting and I appropriate. Now, of course, that's a different sort of a whole, trajectory or a problem or a situation where I'm aware that, okay, here I want to quote, like why I want to have a large hammerhead and a whipping woman from Picasso, resting on Hammerhead's head. Now it's a conscious decision. There are many whipping women done by Picasso, but I choose specific one. So I think the sense of history or whatever I read and I see, that remains in my memory or kind of in my visual memory, and then I kind of decide this specific Liechtenstein, not any Liechtenstein, that kind of thing, and then I structure it in a certain way. Depends on the medium, depends on the subject matter, like that. But I enjoy, I think I feel very happy when I see other people's work, when it comes into my work. And I also notice that, most important thing that I'm in India. Where, imagine how many museums we have. Today, a student from art school in London, Berlin, Paris or anywhere, if he wants to think or study a Rembrandt or a Piero della Francesca or a Picasso or Duchamp, he can simply go to the museum and see. We were deprived. Such a sense of loss that, that all these years, only rarely someone will come from London or somewhere, he will search light at the Jesus School of Art, then we would see, in those days, all transparency, some of the qualities also not very good. Reproduction, the JJ library only had all early moderns. So it was all there in imagination, memory. Some magazines of, studio magazine used to come in those days, and those kind of things, some would show. So it was all not there. And I mean, and you are a part of much, definitely. I mean, my Indian art from the past tradition is one thing, but I mean, you're part of and you want everything from all over the world, art, So I think that, becomes so strong that, Van Gogh or Matisse and, their work, like having, as if, like say, I'm painting in my room with a still life, or my father sitting in a sofa. From background, I said, okay, I would put Picasso print in the background, And just like a student, like I started I still have that work. In 73, 74, I was in 9th or 10th standard. I copied portrait of Van Gogh self-portrait. That was my first oil on paper. And there was a lot of joy of, copying a master. And I still enjoy that.
That's interesting because most of if you see even Salvador Dali's early work, it's copies of the old masters. But before I ask Tasneem a question, just one last question to you. When you talk of the other, what does the other mean to you? Is it the marginalized other, like the wretched of the earth or Fanon, or Said's Orientalism, or has the definition of the other changed for you? Is the white Eurocentric world the other for you? It depends on which topography you are. Because normally when we talk of the other, we think of the wretched of the earth, or we think of Said. So who is the other? Is it the marginalized other? You talked of Kolatkar, who wrote, in fact, of the other. It was the other that he was writing about. So has the other changed? Has the definition of the other changed? Or is it still the other?
No, I think I have not read Said and many names which you mentioned, but my interest probably is in, we here in India, in Indian philosophy, I mean, you are also a scholar on that not to see as if, I remember seeing a beautiful show in Rubin's museum in New York, which is a comparative new museum. It was about Sikh paintings, actually, Punjab painting, mainly of Sikh sect and religion. Lots of Guru Nanak's paintings were there. And the show was called I See No Stranger. I am interested in this aspect of thing, that how far we will keep saying that you are from Pakistan, this is me, it's mine, and I am here. It's my home, that's not mine, that's my brother's home. I mean, enough of this, that's one probably social, political content I'm saying. But even, for art, I think, why we go to museums? Why we see so much? Why? Although there are so many people in the museum looking at, on their own way. I think somewhere we just really imbibe it, we kind of, take in our things. But I think at those moments are what exactly if we concentrate and think. Then I think it's like sometimes I say this, if I say the moon is mine, no one can snatch it from me.
Wonderful. That's great. Tasneem, you have set up an incredible museum. So, from your point of view, how have you dealt with these two key concepts of the self and the other in, say, if you'd like to talk of any one show that you've done, or in your policy of doing work at the museum?
So, the whole museum, in fact, is about a particular gaze. It's about how the colonial rulers interpreted a subaltern culture and distorted it, obviously, to suit the particular paradigms that they had There was the arts and crafts movement. They wanted to showcase India in a particular light. Of course, they glamorized India to some extent, or they did exactly the reverse. Sometimes they glamorized it through the Maharajas, etc. And otherwise, what they did is they just said that Indians were not capable of being great artists, you know. So we have tried to look at that gaze and tried to look at the way this culture was interpreted, and by inviting the artists in, is to in some way comment on that, to investigate it, to showcase its the lie, really, in a sense, of what it was and how it was being interpreted. And I think that in doing that investigation, it is an exploration also of one's own, how one has been complicit. You know, we as a people were also in many ways complicit in those interpretations, to investigate that, to sort of peel the layers and to make those discoveries. And I think that is what contemporary art, when you invite it into institutions of this kind, into historic spaces, that's what they do. There is, of course, the one very sort of, a very benign, a very marginal kind of reading. You see people just looking quickly and walking through, and then there is the artist who engages at a much more profound level with the artwork and looks at it and tries to interpret it and peel away those layers. And I think that's very important. But I also think that today, in our culture today, the idea of the other and how do we break down these boundaries, because for me as a Muslim, it's very, I mean, I'm a Muslim married to a Hindu, but for me that has been an extremely important issue also of how do we create forums. Where are the forums that we can deal with these difficult issues, where we can address them in civilized ways, where we can agree to disagree, or we can try to change people's views. And I really believe that the museum and cultural spaces are that kind of forum, where that sort of dialogue can happen, where we can investigate, we can look at the other, we can talk about painful issues, we can go through a certain kind of catharsis if necessary, in a civilized way, without sort of breaking buildings and throwing stones at each other. And you know, I feel there are ways of addressing this and coming together to make this happen. And I think the more forums that we have, unfortunately in India what has happened is that the space, as Sadanand said, is being restricted, it's being suffocated. We're not allowing for that space to burgeon and develop. So, you know, I think that issue of the self and the other is a very important issue for India today.
So we've got these two very interesting views, one that of a museum director, facilitator, and that of an artist. I do want to invite one or two questions because you'll have enough time for the interaction with the speakers over lunch. But it's also nice to always have a more interactive, you know, we can go on talking. I, as an academic, am trained to talk for hours. I'm sure Atul can talk for hours about his work as Tasneem can, but I think it's also fair enough that we kind of have a bit of a dialogue with.
Anyone having any question?
Well, artists have not taken the initiative, so as a novice, I decided to.
Well, you live with an artist. So.
Thanks. Tasneem ji, the question to you is that you said that the museums have a purpose behind it, and it is to create a interactive thing in the society, to churn their mind and to address the issues and ultimately have a positive outcome to this, give a positive direction to this. But on the other hand, we saw in your presentation, if that is the objective, then why the focus on the number of visitors to the museum? That whether we have 1,000 numbers or 2,000 numbers or 3,000 numbers, because they are just viewers. They are not behind what exactly was the purpose of creating that institution. I did notice in your this thing that you are creating the spaces for the workshops and other thing. Perhaps that is the culture which need to be put focus on. to sensitize the
So we
society?
do both, because as I showed you, we have seminars, we have lots of workshops. But I think it's extremely, I mean, footfall, we have to work within a system. We have to justify our budgets to the government. And the government is interested, we are a government institution, and we get our money and our corpus from the government. And even for our donors, the number of footfall is important. So any museum in the world, any museum, and the V&A, when they have partnerships with us, the first thing they look at is what's the footfall. And that will determine where they take their exhibitions. So interestingly, Calcutta has had the highest footfall for all the V&A exhibitions. So that is an important issue that you raised, that there are those systemic problems which as an institution we have to deal with. We need money to survive, to do workshops, to pay people, and we have to work within a bureaucratic setup that looks at culture in a very different kind of way from which you and I, because what you're asking is a question which is important, that are you addressing the needs of those who need to interact with artists, who need to engage in a more fruitful and productive way with the arts. And so we try to, of course, address that as well through our education programs. We are actually creating, for the first time in a museum, I don't think there's any other museum in India that does this, a workshop space. So our artists can come in and people can actually see them working if they're going to do produce a work of art in the future. It's happening in that workshop space. So there is much of that interactivity going to happen. But one lives just as artists have to sell and depend on galleries. So there is the real world also that one has to deal with and address the issues of the real world too. Thank you.
And many viewers are also, there's a kind of a crossover between viewers and people who would engage with artists or be part of that constituency.
I also want to just say to you, this is a kind of fallacy that we have, that aam janta jo aati hai, unko koi shauk nahi hai in cheezon mein. That is not true. I actually find that the people who come from the villages stand and make a real effort to read our texts. As I said, they stand in a little line to sign the book and they want their voice to be heard. They talk to we have trained all our gallery attendants to be able to speak in Hindi and Marathi to all the people who come. So they're very interested. What happens is, even now with school parties, we actually disallow school parties to come in and march through the museum, which is the traditional way they do it. We say, if you come, you have to inform us, you have to make an appointment, and we will give you a guide, and you come in smaller groups. Of course, sometimes we can't control it, they just arrive. But we have a very big education department. That actually is the main thrust of the museum, is the education department.
One of the most important things that is happening at your museum is perhaps it's breaking the concept of, the very concept of a museum, where most people feel it is a graveyard which is to be visited. It has only objects of the past and it has meanings only in the past and it has nothing to do with our present life or our contemporary expression. And I think the program that you're running is doing that. It is trying to link the past and the present, and the ways of living then and the ways of living now. And there is something like a stream of consciousness that somehow is very important in any part of teaching of art or experiencing art. I think it's a very important thing to comprehend. And by doing that intervention that you're doing, it is bringing more and more people in to really look at even the works that were existing there already, along with the works that are being created. I think that is a very interesting way for me to look at this museum, because it was already, there was something there, and then something is now created, and that link is something that most people need to grapple with. Even in our art history, when we study, or the curriculums that we study, somehow we leave our students somewhere just after modern period, and just hope that they will understand what is happening in today's times. So our courses are so much grounded in the discourses and the past histories, that somehow we feel it is not important really to bring the student to the times that he's seeing and he's located and is experiencing. And that I think is very welcome, and I think it is important, which I appreciate and which I much enjoy there whenever I go. That's for you. And for Atul, I don't know, maybe this is a very silly question to ask maybe, but it's just my own curiosity. I mean, would you differentiate between appropriation and copywriting or plagiarization or something like that? Does that cross your mind when you work at all? Or you feel completely free to draw Baconian figure, or Picasso's Weeping Woman, or even something else, Bhopin's portrait? Or I'm just very curious, because it's very different for writers. The moment they do something like this, okay, it would be called you plagiarized a text, or you plagiarized an author's thought or idea. But I'm intrigued to know from an artist how he feels when he works with so many references, and so very well in your case, I must say, because you rework it in a way that it all comes together, and we see, we enjoy your work, we enjoy Picasso through your work in that sense, as you have, you embed it again into your work. And I am very, very intrigued by this process.
No, I think one thing is, sure that like the quotations or the reference or the images which I use, often they are quite already well known. It's not something that, someone was doing somewhere quietly, or that I saw and then kind of, taken and then shown his mind. It's not that. Like Picasso, everyone knows Picasso. And it's like now today, it's like we paint a mountain. Do we have a copyrights with God or nature or someone? Because it was created by someone, or it was part of the evolution or whatever, but it's there. The same way for me now, Picasso or Mondrian, they exist me like that. I see them like that because they are so much, I have seen so much of them. That's one thing. Second thing is that when I am appropriating them, you see, there are, how many Picassos are there? Thousands of Picassos, hundreds of thousands of Picassos are there. I choose specific one, which suits in my, what I am trying to do and attempt. So I think there I, probably it's a kind of sometimes hybrid sort of a thing. But like for example, say what I basically enjoy, I know, I mean, till now I have not faced of that kind of problem, but probably when I did Gangavatar and after Raja Ravi Varma, so when the Ganga, descending Ganga image, on top I superimposed Duchamp's nude descending staircase, and I painted my shadow opening the hand like that. And the myth of Ganga, of course, we know that Ganga coming, descending, and in such a force that Bhagirath had and all that to go and tell Sheba, please hold it, otherwise everything will be deluge, And I noticed that within India also, I mean, because say earlier what was painting and sculpture, mainly, sculpture in marble and bronze, and painting in oil, and maybe some watercolors. But a lot of new things in last 20 years, Diwan is here, who had, I remember his early works and all, trying new things, from the quite early period, but later on in last 15, 20 years, it's coming in a full-fledged. So I thought that, like someone has to hold, like Shiva, this conceptual art movement which is coming to us, So I just, that thought idea came and I just kind of painted it myself that way. Now what happened that when my mother saw the painting, she is totally familiar with the myth of Ganga and the Ravi Varma oleograph as well. But she doesn't know who is nude descending staircase and the kind of form which I superimpose on top of it. When I show that work abroad, they are familiar with Duchamp's nude descending staircase, but not familiar with the myth of Ganga or Ravi Varma image. And I know both. So I thought, that this strange hybrid, let it be there, and that it was a puzzling. Some of my poet friends who reads little too much in paintings, so they said, because now Ganga has been polluted, so that's why I had this kind of a cubistic sort of a grey umber color, image of the river. They read it like that. But I think essentially when I do this, I notice that people are sometimes baffled. ये इसमें विनोद बिहारी और मोंद्रिया कहाँ से आ गया? Kind of a thing. Within that, I think, but Vinod Bihari tree lover, and Mondriya started with the tree trunk and the branches and ultimately arrived to this kind of abstraction. So ऐसे कुछ मेरा, I kind of have my own story, narrative, the way I read them, and I do it. And I notice that then my viewer gets engaged more with the painting to try to understand, as if the painting is a puzzle sometimes. Knowing things, even knowing things that this is Picasso, this is Matisse, or this is Gaston. So I think that way I do it, and I enjoy it, yeah. And of course, it's quite known, and it's not something. I think I was told that when there is a parody happens, or then when there is a comment in a certain way, then it's, law-wise, it's allowed. But I think every time there is no parody or anything. But I think I am enjoying doing these things, and generally, people are familiar with the images I use, and like distance is such a well-known thing. There's nothing, this thing that I try to grab that and try to sell it like that. Like in the Bombay, if you go towards the town in city of Bombay, you get that they sell Salman Rushdie or Kiran Nagarkar books, printed by someone locally, and try to sell, not the original Penguin or Faber and Faber or anything. No, that's something totally galat. But this is.
So I'll just thank my fellow panelists, and we root this now with closing it, and Diwan, you can.
First of all, I must thank our distinguished panelists, Dr. Tasneem Mehta, Dr. Alka Pande, and Atul Dodiya, and the audience. And I apologize to those whose questions we could not take. Now, probably they can take, we can take those questions in the next session. After this session, we will have lunch, and then Dr. Navina will give her presentation, and Bhavna Kakkad will introduce the magazine Take. We are proud to be associated with Take because Take is our media partner along with Indian Express. And one thing which I wanted to say, that Atul Dodiya is a voracious reader. For those who do not know much about it, he's a reader of the history, of the art history, of minds, of films, and contemporary times.